Hello, fellow artists. Here I am with my happy elf. Oh my goodness. Today I'm going to show you, in the Christmas spirit, a snowman. How to paint with watercolor a snowman. So we are going, and oh yeah, she doesn't like it. We are going to get back into this studio and do the winter snowman. So I hope you enjoy it. Let me know in comments. Happy holidays, and stay tuned for lots more videos.
Okay, here we go. What I'm doing here is just the circles for the snowman. Just taking two objects that I had laying around and making a circle. Then the next is the masking fluid. I really want the left side of the snowman to stay really white. So I did a lot of masking fluid there. Then I did random masking fluid all over for the snow. Now the fun part. This is cold pressed watercolor paper, which takes a lot of water. So this is just plain water. What I'm doing is I'm wetting it first, and I'm going over pretty much everywhere from the lower end. I'm doing the bottom part first, which is the ground. And I got a little water on the snowman. Didn't want it on there. So I blotted it up, and now I'm applying more water because the pigment is really only going to go where the water is on the paper. So now I am blending. This is Opera Rose, Winsor Newton, and I'm going to start applying the colors. And I'm doing kind of lightest to dark. And there's going to be a lot of gouache. I know I'm going to use a lot of gouache for the snow. So I'm okay with going a little darker because, first of all, watercolor's dry, about 50% lighter. And second of all, I know I'm going to be doing white over, gouache over. So I want kind of a dark base so I have the contrast. Now, I also know I'm going to have a sunset in the background. So I want to make sure I have the pink and yellows, oranges that represent the sunset that's reflecting off of the snow. I'm not sure, that doesn't really show in the reference photo, but I kind of wanted to do that to add a little more color to the snow. So here I am adding manganese blue with some Payne's gray, and just getting again, going kind of, I'm not really afraid to go too dark. I am going to do a couple more layers. I actually ended up doing a lot of layers in this painting, and especially for the snowman and for the snow. Now, you don't really need to do so many layers. I think if I had planned better, I would have maybe left more of the white of the paper so I didn't have to use so much gouache to lighten up the snow, but I kind of like the effect. I did use a lot of masking fluid for the snow in the background, and that turned out pretty good. I was happy with the snow falling, which is from the masking little dots of the masking fluid, but I think I would have used more masking fluid for the ground snow. I did not. I let on the hot press watercolor paper. I definitely left more white of the paper for the snow. I used the white of the paper to create the snow. Now what I'm doing is adding just pure Payne's gray. And the paper, as you can see, is really wet. It's actually starting to buckle up there where my brush is, but that's okay. I actually really enjoy this part. It's really fun. I'm being really careful not to, I have the masking fluid there on the edge of the snowman, but being careful not to get any of the color in there. And this is just the horizon line. I can kind of still see my pencil line. So this is really just getting the horizon really dark and saving a little area there in the middle for the sun. And that's coming up here in a minute. While everything's still wet, I'm going to do the glow of the sun, the reds and the yellow. Here I am dropping in a touch of yellow, and I'm kind of careful not to get it too close to the Payne's gray, although it kind of did, but I'm not worried about it because I'm going to end up spraying it with the sprayer water. This is Windsor Red, and I'm planning on making kind of a nice orange with the yellow and the red, and then the red and the Payne's gray may make a nice little violet-ish. So I spray it with my spray bottle. This is a fun part. I'm just letting it move around, absorb a little bit, picking up some of the extra with the tissue there, being careful not to like leave a streak on the paper, just letting it absorb on my tape there. And this is where you just kind of have to play around and just let the watercolor work for you. I'm picking up a little extra. I think it was running into the blue, the Payne's gray there. I didn't want it to run too much in there because I want a glow around it. I don't want it to go from orange to the Payne's gray. I want yellow, orange, a little white, and then the blue. So that's the goal, right? Never really know what's going to happen with watercolors, but that's the goal. So now while the paper's still wet, I'm softening up some of those edges that are starting to dry and just making it a little atmospheric, trying to get a beautiful atmosphere in the background. Now I'm adding a little more red, touch more red. And, if you have a scrap piece of paper, and it's got to be cold pressed watercolor paper, preferably the same paper you're working on, so you'll get the same effect. But practice doing just this, just blending your colors on a really wet piece of cold pressed watercolor paper and just kind of play around because it's really hard to make a mistake, to be honest, because it's just going to blend. And if you see a little mud starting to happen, you just pick it up like I'm trying. So it's really, really fun. It's a sky. Like I said, it's really kind of hard to make a mistake. So just play around and have fun with it. So I painted, or didn't paint, I drew in some trees with a watercolor pencil. And because the paper's so wet, it has worked for me in the past where when the paper's really wet, the pencil marks just kind of blend out, but it didn't work out this time. I ended up going over them. But while I'm seeing if they, blend into the background, I ended up picking up a little bit of the sun. I'm kind of watching what happens with the sun as the paint bleeds and dries. It totally, it changes. And going back to the trees, using my brush this time, it's a wet brush, just blending in the watercolor pencil marks and just kind of seeing what's going to happen there. These are in the distance, so I want them blurry, no detail there, and I am keeping my eye on the sun. So with watercolors, you're kind of multitasking, especially when it's really wet like this. You're jumping around, and while you're over in this area, then something's happening down in the other, the lower left area. You got to keep an eye on, and then while you're working on the trees, you got to keep an eye on the sun, like I'm doing. So now that you can see the colors from the sun are blending into the blue. They keep on blending in, they keep moving, so I keep wiping it up. And now I'm using a tissue to blot the center because I want a nice glow in the center. I end up going over and doing the exact same thing again. This is kind of a rinse and repeat style watercolor. Now I'm using watercolor pencils and getting in the colors of the snowman. So his hat, his scarf, I'm using the Caran d'Ache Museum Aquarels. The colors are pretty clear The name is orange. The other color I used is yellow, so nothing fancy. This, I think looks like maybe this is cornelian, or it was just similar to a burnt sienna. Just getting the base layers in, but I'm still kind of trying to get the direction of the knitting in the cap. I am going to do just a suggestion of kind of the knitting and the values. So the darker values to the right, the lighter to the left, because the sun is hitting him to the left, on the left side. His right, our left. And once I have some color on there, enough color, I use just water and blended it. Again, this is a base layer and there is masking fluid. I want to leave kind of the rim of his hoodie. I want to make sure that stays white. And I know I'm going to be using wash later too. So I do want to go, you get my darkest values in. And that's kind of what I'm doing. So this is just a base layer. There was a silver brush that I really enjoyed that brush because you can get a really fine point and then you can get a pretty large area, when you press it flat. But really, it's impressive for the fine point, but you do have to hold it straight up and down. So, fortunately, my hand may be blocking the camera when I, hold it straight up and down. Right now, I'm holding it like a pencil. But when I want a really fine point, as you'll see, I hold it straight up and down. The camera does block it. I do have some side angles. That's why right there. So that's why I'm trying to get as many side angles as I can. Now, a little bit more of a fun part. This is round 2 of the background, and I'm getting my horizon line in there. This is Payne's Gray, and it's a kind of I put it in the horizon line, let's say half of water, that initial line. Now I take my brush, again, a silver brush. This is their oval brush, which again, you can get a pretty nice point with it. I'm going around the snowman, and you can see I'm just being really careful not to, and I know the snowman's hat is pretty dry. I did the watercolor pencil on there, and the snowman's hat's pretty dry, so I'm not really worried about it blending in. And the paper was dry. The background was dry. So now this is basically wet on dry. Going back to get some more pigment to drop in there, and that's called charging right there. When you pick up pure pigment, not diluted with the water, just right from the well, and moving around that water and letting it do its work, letting the watercolor work for me, right? And just starting to play. And you saw how much lighter it dried from earlier. So again, I'm not that afraid of it getting too dark at this point. With the final layers, I'm really careful, but this side on the left is really dark. Like maybe there's some shrubs in the background. So, and I like it having the corners and the edges kind of darker because then it draws the eyes into the center and draws the eyes into the subject. So you see I'm darkening up the right side there too, just to kind of balance it out a little bit. And I'm just kind of I'm waiting, I'm watching, I'm just doing a little bit here, a little bit there. I'm watching what happens and tilting, being really careful. That's another great thing about these brushes. Got the great point there, going right around his hat, creating a little texture there, or little edges on his hat. And I really don't want it to get into the sun. So I'm going to be blotting up here with a tissue in a second. And you notice I didn't really like those trees. So I just went right over them. And if they show up in the background, that's actually great because they look like super distant trees. Now I'm going to soften up the edges here. I'm going to be really careful not to get into my sun. And I'm just watching the water bleed. I'm letting it bleed. And here I go with the tissue. Then I add a little Windsor red, thinking I could get a really pretty violet, a really pretty purple with this Payne's gray. So I'm letting that bleed. I kind of like what's going on. Adding a little yellow, and just kind of automatically turns orange. There's so much going on right there. There's so much. So I'm just kind of letting it sit. I'm going to get a tissue. I'm going to add blopping in some yellow again, and just going to let it bleed because I'm looking for that atmospheric landscape. And to do that, you just kind of have to let it bleed, right? You have to be a little patient. If you like this video, please like and subscribe. It really helps me make more videos for you. Thank you. So then I'm using a smaller brush to pick up and to create more of a definitive line there for the landscape. Sorry about the hand. I am working on getting a new camera so I can get a side view. Thank you to my patrons for supporting me. I'm spending all my money on equipment and supplies, so yay! This is a manganese blue, which I love this blue. I think manganese and Payne's gray are my favorite blues. And very, it's on dry. I didn't wet the paper first where I'm doing the snowman. So these are kind of the shadows and the reflection of the snow onto the snowman. And I have a little, remember I did that opera rose earlier on the bottom part of the snowman. Now I do the blue right over it and it turned into that really pretty violet there. And this is also going to be kind of the base of some shadows as well, like the shadow of the scarf. That's just some Payne's gray. And yeah, just letting it just kind of do what it wants to do. And you can see it's not bleeding right there because it's on dry paper. But I will do a drop of water on the edges to soften up the edges. I kind of don't want the edges too soft on this. I kind of like the contrast of the light and the dark. Now I'm doing the other side. And I will get an edge there later so I know, so it's not too blue where it blends into the background. I kind of fix that up later. And then when the background gets darker, then that part of the snowman gets lighter, right? All right, here's a little magenta. Just wanted a little more color. And I know I'm going to go over this with some more of the Payne's gray and the blue. So this is really just kind of a brighter pink base layer. And I'm having fun softening the edges. And the paper, so you remember how it was like super, super wet? It's probably been about maybe 10 minutes. And so now the paper is damp. There's different levels of paper or of wetness on the watercolor paper. So this is damp. When you add water to damp paper, you get the cauliflower effect. Some people, call it. And it's really actually useful when you want to get texture. And I really liked it for the atmosphere and for the snow and maybe some clouds in the background. So I just kind of left it. I did some water. All I did was drop water on there, left it. I'm just going to kind of see what happens. I'm keeping my eye on that sun because you know that it's looking like it's getting green there. So I'm not really too worried about it right now. I know I have some time, but I will wipe up some of that paint that's going into the sun right there. Okay, so now this is gouache, white gouache with the manganese blue. All I'm doing there is just, you can see that's the gouache. I know it's I'm by the sun and it was the afternoon sunlight going right onto my, my well right there. So There's really nothing I could do about it. Close the blinds and everything. And it was just so bright. So it's kind of washed out. But anyway, the gouache is in my palette right there. And I'm mixing it with a little of the manganese blue. And I'm getting that kind of pretty baby blue color. And this is kind of where I was saying earlier that I wish I would have left some of the paper or done more masking fluid on the paper for snow because I just wasn't really digging what was going on with the colors that I put down. I really wanted it more white and I wanted more texture of the snow. I really wanted to try to create, the fluffiness of the snow. So I'm just blending in with what I have. I want an edge of the horizon line. I wanted to create more of an edge, and I know I'm going to go over the background again with Payne's gray and even neutral tint a couple more times because the background I really wanted dark, as you can see in the finished piece. Now this is just pure white, and gouache really absorbs. So even though you're like, yes, look how white it is, that looks great, you give it 20 minutes and it's almost gone. So that's why you see right there, I just took a chunk of white. I just took a piece of it, basically almost right out of the tube, and putting it on there really thick because that's how I want it to dry. And that will give me the fluffy texture of the snow. And the brush is giving me kind of a nice pointy, so I can get some edges of the snow too. And I'm just adding some pink in there because, trying to represent the sun, the sunset, the colors of the sun. So this right here is a great example of contrast. I'm putting some just pure Payne's gray right underneath the white, and that makes it look like, the snow caps, little snow right there. And just getting some more white in there with the gouache, added a little pink to it. This was kind of a cool little wash right here. Just getting the layers of the snow is really what I was just trying to do. And to do that, it all goes back to value. So I have the darker Payne's gray, the darker manganese blue, then the lighter value. I added white to it, so then that's a lighter value. I'm just kind of getting all the layers. Now, while that dries, I'm going back to the little guy's hat and using a size 1, size 0 brush for the details. I told you I was going to use a lot of gouache in this painting. So here we go, more gouache, which is fine. Nothing wrong with gouache, especially in a snowy landscape. Loving the gouache. More details. Letting the gouache kind of blend in with the paint that I just put down, and that helps to create some values too, like some lighter oranges. And again, I know the gouache is going to lighten up a lot when it dries, so I definitely do more layers of the gouache for when I do the final details. Back to the fun part. Now, the background is totally dry. I am adding water. As you can see, I'm putting down just water, and I'm going to do exactly the same thing that I was doing before. Some Payne's gray, but just where I want the darker areas of Payne's gray. So it's going to be a lot on the left, right there with the shrubs. Then after I do a layer of this, I go in with the trees. This is where I add the trees with a paintbrush, not watercolor pencils, because I didn't really like them on the right there. So I'm just going to kind of cover them up. they look they look like Charlie Brown trees, Charlie Brown Christmas trees. So yeah, I'm watching the water. I'm kind of, I'm going slow. I'm taking my time because it's super wet. And this is cold press watercolor papers, Arches cold press, which is awesome. It can take a beating, it can take a ton of layers and a ton of water. And this is the 140 pound. So, this isn't the super thick one. It's right in the middle. I'm softening up the edges and tilting a little bit where I want the water to go, where I want the paint to bleed. I really like what's happening in the horizon there. The paint is kind of creeping up like that. Looks like shrubs in the distance. So while that's happening, yeah, I put it towards the camera so you can see it. So while that's happening, I get my brush and I start making some trees. So here I got, this is black, I think, or sepia. And I think I mixed sepia. That's what it is. I mixed sepia and black. So you don't get like a total black and sepia because I have so much paint. And so sepia would have been too light. Nice side view. I was able to get a nice side view with my phone. Now I'm thinking right now, okay, how am I going to blend, the base of the tree into the snow? I'm not really worried about the trees now because they're distant trees. I want them to be blurry, atmospheric. So now what I do is I get just water and I blot it. And it's still pretty wet down there. And you can see there's a lot of gouache. So it kind of lightened up the color of the black and the sepia. Now this actually is brown. This is another color. This is, I think, just burnt sienna or Van Dyke brown. And this tree, I want to give the illusion of being a little closer. So I went a little lighter with it. I just really just did a different color. Not lighter, but just a different color because the closer trees you want actually darker. So I'm just kind of messing around. I know the colors are gonna totally change when it dries. So I'm really just getting the super far away trees right now. Letting it blend into all that Payne's gray, and while the paper is still super wet. I want the bleed. Okay, round 3 for the sun. You can see how much it dried. I really didn't pick up too much of the paint around it from the blue, from the Payne's gray. But this is Winsor yellow, just dropping right in there. Adding some Winsor red right around it. Pretty much the exact same thing. Like I was saying earlier, it's pretty much just a rinse and repeat. This paper takes so much color in and absorbs so much. It's really all about the layers. Now, when I did this in the hot pressed watercolor paper, totally different story. I used the watercolor background, the pencils for the watercolor background. But I really didn't need as many layers. So it's really a kind of a choice, an artist's choice of what they like. Now, while I watch the sun bleed, do its thing, I'm adding a couple more trees and just keeping my eye on what's going on, watching the bleed. That's what wet on wet pretty much is about. You just watch what's happening and let the watercolors work for you. Okay, spraying again. I didn't like it. I didn't like what was happening. So this is a kind of a way to correct mistakes. Okay. It was just I don't know why I didn't like it. I just didn't like it. So I think it was getting too dark. And so I sprayed, blotted it up, and then just kind of leave it. See what happens with that. Now while that dries, going to a little fun part here. Having a little fun with my phone camera, my phone video. This is gouache, and this is the manganese blue, and that's how I kind of blended it together. So this is round 2 of the gouache layer, and it went a little lighter than the last layer. So it's a little bit more white up there by the horizon. Now that's just pure white. So this just is experimenting, just playing around. Have a scratch piece of paper if you've never done snow before, and just kind of experiment. You notice I'm using a different brush. I've experimented with a brush. Now this is dry brushing. The paper isn't that wet. And I just grab some of the gouache on my brush, basically like right out of the tube. And this is the same thing. There's not that much water on the gouache. Now that water is on the that you see there. It's just that it's really wet. The paper is really wet. All right, the masking fluid is coming off. I use a little artist tape just rolled up to take the masking tape off. I try not to use my fingers, but if it happens, it happens just because of, the oils on your hands and all that kind of stuff. I don't think it matters so much with watercolor as it does colored pencil, but anyway, here I am using my artist tape, taking off the masking fluid. This is a fun part too because you're getting close to the end. You're starting to see progress after all of those layers. I've got a little snow there, and it's just kind of exciting. Okay, getting some details now on Mr. Snowman. This is neutral tint, and I wet the paper just slightly before I put this down. That's why you can see a little bit of the bleed. This is the shadow of his hoodie, of his cap. Then to soften the edges, just do a little bit of white right next to it. Adding some more details to his cap so they're getting some of the knitting details in there. This is a burnt sienna, burnt umber, I think mixed together. And then I get it really dark. Now it snowed. We're going to make it look like it snowed. More gouache, and actually lots of gouache on this one of the final layers here. Lots of gouache, getting some snow on his cap and getting my lights light enough, my darks dark enough. This is really where lots of details. This is actually the more time consuming part where you're just doing lots and lots of details. Here's the eyes, getting his eyes in. This is a size 0 brush, Winsor Newton Series 7. Fantastic brush. I think the best for detail with watercolor. I think they also call them riggers, the really small pointy ones. Just getting some darker values on the scarf there. And now I'm going to go to the fun part, the carrot on his nose. Yay! I'm using cadmium orange right here. And then I use magenta or some Winsor red for like the shadows. Okay, coming up here, I'm going to be doing the shadow on his face. So what I'm doing is this just water I put down there. This is just water. So I'm doing the wet on wet. So I get the nice bleed. This is the lovely manganese blue again. Getting the shadow and the reflection. It's more about the reflection of the snow onto this side of his face. And it's definitely part of the shadow because the light is on his right side, our left side. So once it's down, once I have the color down, then I lift with a wet, damp brush. I lift up the color I'm making the shadow of his cap a little darker with some Payne's gray, or actually I think that was neutral tint. A little bit more neutral tint. I love neutral tint for shadows. It's got a bit of a violet-y color there. A little shadow for his schnoz, his nose there, his carrot nose. And then I blot up with a little tissue there. And then that was done. Let that dry. Going for some more shadows here. Just blending in actually some of the color on his side here. Then I do the buttons while that dries. I'm going to do his buttons here. Blot that up. Here come the buttons. Nope, it's his mouth. I guess the buttons are in the next clip. This is I'm pretty sure this is neutral tint and probably a little sepia or black, just something, dark, obviously, for his mouth, which are, I guess, little buttons as well. Small buttons for his mouth, or nuts, or I don't know what you use for the mouth of a snowman. I forgot what you're supposed to use if there's kind of what we were told as kids what to use, right? Always a carrot for a nose, sticks for his arms. Maybe it was buttons for the eyes and his chest. I don't know. Maybe somebody can comment and let me know what we're supposed to make the mouth of the snowman of. Okay, so here are the buttons for his belly. This is just, I wanted a kind of a highlight underneath. So I do like a kind of a yellow with maybe a little burnt sienna. Then I'm doing some brown, probably Van Dyke brown. And then because I have it so yellowy and brown, I'm just doing the outline in black. And then it all kind of blends together. That actually looks like maybe burnt umber. You really don't want the same color anyway, because you want the contrast and it helps it make it more look realistic. Blah. All right, now the shadows for the buttons. Here we go. It's just super light touch and pretty watery color on my brush. And I know I can lighten it up if I want to. So I'm not afraid to go too dark. I know I can lift it up if I need. So while that's wet, I'm going to get a little darker color in there, and that is the neutral tint. So going a little darker for the shadows. Okay, back to the gouache. Getting more of a definition of Mr. Snowman's bottom with the white gouache, pretty thick. I don't think I have hardly any water, just enough to activate it, but pretty thick. Now, while that dries, I'm doing his happy arms with the tree branches. This is Van Dyke brown, only with a little burnt umber. And we are on the home stretch here, so I'm going to speed it up a little bit while I get all these details done. Now it's just like I was saying earlier, devil's in the details, and the details tend to be what take a lot of time. I'm kind of going back and forth, getting water because I'm trying to find like that perfect. See, that's too dry. So I add a little water and like, okay, there we go. So really, it really takes, practice and a little patience to get that perfect consistency on your brush with watercolors. Adding some detail to his buttons, getting them a little darker, and then some gouache now mixed in with some of the brown to get that kind of taupey color. Adding some more of just the brown, kind of going back and forth here. Getting some contrast with the scarf. Then some more gouache. What did I tell you about the gouache? Layer, layer, layer. Now I'm using the small brush. Again, I kind of want the ridges of the snow, so I'm just using pure gouache. And again, it absorbs so much into the paper, so that's also why I have to do a ton of layers. Just making some leaves here. Just added some brown and a little water. Now I was looking at it and I'm like, well, if the sun is coming down on it, it was looking so blue, the sun would have a little yellow or orange or something reflecting off the snow caps, the little tips there. So I just added a little yellow, any yellow really, that you have. Just add it in there and maybe blend in a little bit with the gouache. Then what I did for a little contrast is I just dropped in the manganese blue, and I was careful not to have it blend in with the yellow. I didn't want green. Now I added a little more water to the gouache, more than say I did with the snow caps, and did a little splatter effect. Tapped it with my brush. Then I go back with a wet brush. I'm just lifting up to try to get some of the white of the sun there. So I'm lifting up some paint. Didn't really do much. Tissue works better. Get it wet and blot with the tissue. But now with a wet brush and a tissue, I go around and blot some of the splatter because I don't want them all the same bright white. I want them different levels of, color of value, because that's what it looks like with snow. They're not all the same color or shape or anything like that. So just mixing them up a little bit. Just all you got to do is just drop with a wet brush, just do tiny little touches of the splatter, and then you can get it to spread out and look a little bit more like a snowflake instead of just a round dot, which I prefer for snow. And here we have it. Woo, that was a lot of layers. Taking off the tape very carefully. And I just love it when the border is there because it really just makes it pop. So here we go. Yay, Mr. Snowman. Watercolor on cold press watercolor paper. I hope you enjoyed this video. And once again, please like and subscribe for more videos and check out this next video. I think you'll love it.